Hello there and welcome to our World News program. These are your headlines. The United States will strengthen its military positioning in Europe so that NATO can respond to all the threats coming from all directions. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has been sworn in as the Philippine president, succeeding the outgoing leader Rodrigo Duterte. The surviving attacker of the 2015 Paris attack has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility to parole. U.S. Senator R. Kelly was jailed for 30 years for sex crimes. Hello Ghana, and thank you for joining me. I am your host Abdurrahim Kashur. First off, on the third day of the NATO summit, U.S. President Joe Biden said that the United States will strengthen its military positioning in Europe so that NATO can respond to the threats coming from all directions. The details are in this report with Hissam Burkan.
The leaders of NATO countries who adopted new strategic roadmap on Wednesday described Russia as the most significant and direct threat to the security of the allies. For his part, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg added that Kyiv can count on the support of NATO for as long as it takes.
Russia poses a direct threat to our security, and of course that will be reflected throughout the strategic concept. Ukraine can count on us for as long as it takes.
Already confronted with Russia, the alliance is also worried about the challenges that China represents for its future security. Leaders of Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea arrived on the third day of NATO summit in Madrid. This is the first time that so many states from the Asia-Pacific zone have been invited to a summit of the Atlantic Alliance. During a bilateral meeting with Secretary General of NATO, the American President Joe Biden announced that the United States would strengthen their forces in Europe by sending military reinforcement from the air, sea and land on the continent in response to Russia's adventure in Ukraine.
We're sending an unmistakable message, in my view, and I think yours as well, that NATO is strong, united, and the steps we're taking during this summit are going to further augment our collective strength. To that end, today I'm announcing the United States will enhance our force posture in Europe and respond to the changed security environment, as well as strengthening our collective security.
This summit witnessed the accession of Finland and Sweden, historically non-aligned, after the lifting of Turkey's veto on Tuesday evening, which has shown almost flawless unity of the alliance since the start of the Russian special military operation.
In the same line of thoughts, still in the Russia-Ukraine fight, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday that his country's army doesn't strike any civilian targets in Ukraine. Putin made the remarks in Ashgabat during a summit with the leaders of the four countries along the Caspian Sea to discuss regional cooperation and international issues. He also warned that if Finland and Sweden welcomed the NATO troops and military infrastructure onto their territory, Russia would respond in a mirror manner.
Ukraine is means to protect NATO's own interest, that is, with hands of Ukrainians and the Ukrainian people. NATO members and leading NATO countries simply want to assert themselves, further assert their role in the world, confirm leadership of their hegemony in the truest sense of the word, their imperial ambitions. As for Sweden and Finland, we don't have such problems with Sweden and Finland that we have with Ukraine, unfortunately. We have no territorial issues or disputes. We have nothing to worry about in terms of membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO. When they want it, they only must clearly understand that there were no threats to them before. Now, if military contingents and infrastructure are deployed there, we will have to respond in a mirror manner.
Контингентов и инфраструктуры мы вынуждены будем отвечать зеркально.
And for more insight about this topic, we spoke previously with Adam Kudash, an ex-US EU ambassador from Poland, who had this to say.
NATO summit showed an extraordinary unity of the whole alliance. This was demonstrated not only by finally overcoming obstacles for Sweden and Finland to join alliance, but also in adopting new strategic concept of NATO that that is really, I would say, an earthquake in how NATO perceives the security environment. I think the signal to Moscow is that NATO is united, NATO is resolved, NATO will take whatever measures it should take to defend itself, to stand ready for any Russian aggression, and to help Ukraine, withstand the current Russian campaign. I think Mr. Putin is trying to absorb and admit the reality that he had absolutely no possibility to stop them join NATO. It would have, besides, never really happened without probably the current aggression on Ukraine. So this is the very result of Putin's policies. But I think, if a country joins NATO earlier or later, NATO infrastructure will encompass that country.
Also in our news, Russia's defense ministry said and Ukraine's president's office said earlier that today Russian forces have withdrawn from Ukraine's Snake Island, a strategic outpost in the Black Sea. Russia's defense ministry confirmed Russian troops has withdrawn from Snake Island, calling it a goodwill gesture and saying that the troops had fulfilled the task assigned to them. The Russian ministry added that the move showed Russia was not impeding UN efforts to organize a humanitarian corridor to export agricultural products out of Ukraine.
On June 30th, as a gesture of goodwill, Russian armed forces completed their tasks on Snake Island and withdrew the garrison stationed there. Therefore, we have demonstrated to the global community that Russia is not hindering efforts by the UN to organize a humanitarian corridor for the export of agricultural products from Ukraine.
Russian missile plowed into the Amstel retail center in Kremenchuk, sparking a brutal fire that quickly consumed the structure. Pope Francis emphasized that he always bears in mind the beloved military Ukrainian, which is still the target of serious offensive like the one that struck the mall, where he was referring to the Russian attack that hit the shopping mall in Ukraine's central city of Kremenchuk, killing 18 people.
I
carry every day in my heart the dear, martyred Ukraine that continues to be flagellated by the barbarous attacks, like the one that hit the shopping center of Kremenchuk. I pray that this insane war can come soon to an end, and I renew an invitation to persevere without tiring in prayers for peace.
In the same story, President Vladimir Zelensky had asked the United Nations to expel Russia from the UN. This comes after a Russian missile strike hit a shopping mall in the city of Kremenchuk, which Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that was hunger for Western weapons. Nabil Khazini has more to tell.
This footage is the last published by Ukraine's president, claiming it shows an evidence of the exact moment when Kremenchuk shopping mall was hit by a Russian missile strike, a strike Zelensky says was deliberate. However, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov pointed out that the strike targeted depots where American and European weapons were stored, and that the shopping center was empty.
A hangar where American and European arms and ammunition were arriving was bombarded. Do we bother you? Following the detonation of the ammunition, an empty shopping center nearby caught fire.
Following the incident and next to the 15 member states of the UN Security Council, Volodymyr Zelensky urged the United Nations to expel Russia from the UN.
It's imperative to establish the tribunal for investigating everything that Russian troops have done against Ukrainians.
And there in Mykolaiv, in the southern of Ukraine, at least 3 people were killed and 5 wounded following a Russian missile strike on a residential building. Moscow says it was a training base for foreign mercenaries.
The Russian armed forces continue to strike military facilities on Ukrainian territory. Within the last 24 hours, Russia's airspace forces has destroyed 4 command posts, including those of Kharkiv 1 and Kharkiv 2 territorial defense battalions near Kharkiv, as well as training base of foreign mercenaries near Mykolaiv.
The Kremlin says Ukraine is only a tool in the hands of the West, and that further supplying it with weapons will absolutely lead to undesirable and rather unpleasant scenarios.
Zelensky affirmed Wednesday that Ukraine carried out its biggest exchange of prisoners of war, securing the release of 144 of its soldiers from Russian captivity. Of those released, 95 were involved in defending the Azovstal steel plant.
We have returned home 144 Ukrainian fighters from Russian captivity, including 59 National Guard fighters, 38 Navy fighters, 28 Armed Force fighters, 17 border guards and 1 policeman. The oldest among the released fighters is 65 years old, the youngest is 19. In particular, 95 Azovstal defenders are coming home.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said that NATO should not lose sight of its southern wing of the Sahel, specifically in Mali, adding that NATO would defend every centimeter of Allied territory. In a dialogue with the Spain's La Hora de la One channel, Sánchez emphasized that as the alliance exists in Eastern Europe, it must strengthen its presence in the south, where Russia expands its mini region.
No de ataque, sino de defensa. Con este término que habrán ustedes utilizado.
The nature of the operations that we and our allies carry out are only deterrents. They are not attacks. And on that basis, we will defend every centimeter of our allies' territory. In addition to the eastern flank, the southern flank must not be forgotten, because Russia is expanding significantly in many areas of strategic importance to the security of the South and NATO. I'm talking about the Sahel exactly, Mali. As we stand in solidarity with our presence in Eastern Europe, we must also stand in solidarity with and strengthen our presence in the South.
To a local matter, Algerian Prime Minister Ayman Ben Abdulrahman announced the signing of 12 cooperation agreements with Egypt in various sectors. This came in a statement issued by the Algerian Prime Minister at the conclusion of the 8th meeting of the Joint Government Committee headed by Ben Abdulrahman and his Egyptian counterpart Mustafa Madbouli in the Algerian capital. Algeria's state oil and gas producer Sonatrach is negotiating ways to benefit from significant global gas price increases in its long-term contracts with European buyers. Sonatrach is considering several options, including partial link to spot gas prices, in contrast that have historically been linked to the price of Brent crude. The one surviving attacker from the 2015 carnage at the Bataclan Theatre and other sites in Paris had been convicted of homicide and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Zara Farjani has more to tell.
A French court on Wednesday convicted all 20 men involved in the 2015 killing of 130 people in a coordinated gun and bomb rampage on the Bataclan Concert Hall, cafes and the National Stadium. The 32-year-old Belgian-born Frenchman, the only surviving member of the group that carried out the attacks on November 13, 2015, was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of early release, a sentence handed out only 4 times previously in France.
The civil parties are not rejoicing, but they can observe the intelligence of the decision, the presence of judgment in the sentences given, and they are satisfied that all elements of the crimes alleged to the suspects were kept in all their integrity.
Victims' families expressed their relief after a severe 9-month trial that's been crucial in their quest for justice and closure.
For us, the court was going to decide what would have been the fair sentence, and it has decided to hand in the most severe sentence. I am convinced that this most severe sentence will satisfy the expectations of a certain number of our members, a certain number of victims.
For some survivors, the trial was an opportunity to recount deeply personal accounts of the horrors inflicted that night of the attacks.
I am extremely satisfied about the sentences given. I think they are really at the level of what the state should do to protect itself from these types of individuals.
13 other people, 10 of whom are in custody, were also in the courtroom during the months-long hearings. The court found them guilty of crimes ranging from helping provide the attackers with weapons or cars to planning to take part in the attacks.
Indirect talks between US and Iranian officials in Doha, Qatar, aimed at saving the Iran nuclear deal ended without any progress. Instead, the talks, which were brokered by the European Union, were left in a stagnant spot, which at the point means backwards. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has been sworn in as the Philippine president in a ceremony in Manila, succeeding the outgoing leader Rodrigo Duterte. His inauguration marks a stunning comeback for the Marcos political dynasty, which was ousted after a popular revolt in 1986.
You, the people, have spoken, and it is resounding. When my call for unity started to resonate with you, it did so because it echoed your yearnings, mirrored your sentiments, and expressed your hopes for family, for country, and for a better future. That is why it reverberated and amplified as it did, to deliver the biggest electoral mandate in the history of Philippine democracy.
The 55-year-old R.B. sinner R. Kelly was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison after many accusers testified that he used his start form to exploit them and abuse them sexually. Islam Seed.
The fallen R&B singer R. Kelly was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison over exploiting his fame for racketeering sex crimes against women and underage girls. This heavy sentence against the 55-year-old singer was handed down by the Brooklyn Federal Court.
Moments ago, R. Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This is a significant outcome for all victims of R. Kelly, and especially for the survivors who so bravely testified about the horrific and sadistic abuse they endured. R. Kelly is a predator, and as a result of our prosecution, he'll serve a long jail sentence for his crimes.
The sentencing came after several accusers told the judge about how Kelly promised to help them attain stardom, only to subject them to degrading sensual treatment and physical harm. However, he has repeatedly denied abuse accusations.
It just feels good to know that he's off the streets. I think it was deserved. They did the right thing today.
I don't know what else to say except that I'm grateful. I'm grateful for today. And I'm grateful that Robert Sylvester Kelly is away, will stay away, and will not be able to harm anyone else.
Defense lawyers said Kelly deserves no more than 10 years, arguing that his history as an abused child may have led to such acts.
That we have excellent arguments on appeal and that the Court of Appeals will ultimately determine that this case was overcharged. And that we believe that the offenses for which he's been convicted do not justify a sentence greater than 10 years. We believe there's significant mitigation, and we believe that's the appropriate sentence.
Kelly is being held at the federal detention facility in Brooklyn and is expected to be moved back to Chicago, where he faces another federal trial in August on child abuse and obstruction charges.
The U.S. Attorney for the Western Districts of Texas announced the arrest of 4 men, including 2 Mexican nationals. The arrest warrant came after dozens of migrants lost their lives inside the truck trailer in San Antonio. Back to the report of this incident. Migrants smuggled across the border from Mexico to the U.S. took lives of 51 people when they were left in a tractor trailer without air conditioning in the blazing Texas heat. Islam Seed.
The death toll of people who died after being stuck inside a truck trailer reached 51. According to officials, 39 males and 11 females were among the dead. 22 were from Mexico, 7 from Guatemala and 2 from Honduras.
At this moment, we have confirmed 7 people of Guatemalan nationality, and we know there are also Mexican and Honduran brothers affected by this tragedy.
The question of how long the victims were abandoned on the side of the road was not immediately answered. Following the incident, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador offered his condolences to the families of the victims.
I would like to express my deepest condolences to the families of the Mexican, Guatemalan, and Honduran migrants who died yesterday in a truck.
Desperate families were reaching out to the Mexican consulate in San Antonio throughout the morning looking for their loved ones.
I'm so fed up. I'm so tired that we keep saying that we have been here before, that we have done this before, that we know how to respond to this. It shouldn't have to be that way.
They don't have a choice. They don't have a life, and they don't feel safe. They're hungry. So for them, America is not a choice. It's the only option they have.
Officials in San Antonio took aim at the state's immigration policies and slammed Governor Greg Abbott for what they said was his politicization of the tragedy.
Let me tell you, I don't trust the state of Texas on any of dealing with immigrants. Nationwide, the federal government, they are protected. I can't tell you what some state official will do. They've passed so many laws that try to discriminate against immigrants.
Attempts to cross the U.S. border from Mexico have claimed thousands of lives in both countries in recent decades. The deceased migrants were discovered on the outskirts of Texas City, where temperatures swelled to a high of more than 39 degrees Celsius. The incident is considered as one of the deadliest human trafficking tragedies in recent history.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Hong Kong on Thursday, 2 years after the city underwent changes that furthered Communist Party rule in advance of the 25th anniversary of the British handover. Supporters in Hong Kong welcomed the president by flag-shunted "Home Welcome" in the train station. This trip is the president's first travel away from the Chinese mainland in almost 2.5 years. The Truth Commission set up after the peace agreement with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia guerrilla delivered on Tuesday its report on the atrocities committed during more than half a century of internal conflict. Sofiane Kantouri has more to tell.
The 896-page report, the product of social discourse and inquiry of the war, carried out for just over 4 years, was officially given by Jewish priest Francisco de Roo, who has served as the Commission's chairman since its establishment in 2017.
Today, with this statement and these many pages, we deliver the result of the final report to the country. Uncomfortable truths that challenge our dignity, a message for all as human beings, beyond political choices, cultures and religious beliefs, ethnicities and genders.
The presentation was done in front of the country's newly elected president Gustavo Petro, who will assume office on August 7th.
There are expectations of peace, of the possibility of a great peace, which is mentioned here as the great title of this presentation. The great peace, the integral peace, the possibility of moving to an era of peace in the history of Colombia.
The Truth Commission, made up of academics and civil society representatives, delivers its final report on Colombia's armed conflict and urged the government, the military and rebel groups that are still engaged in combat and rural Colombia acknowledge the suffering that victims had endured and make sure that political differences are no longer settled through violence in the Southern American nation. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the Colombian government reached a peace agreement in 2016 that put an end to a 5-decade conflict that claimed at least 450,000 lives. This agreement included the establishment of the Truth Commission.
And with this report, we come to an end to our news bulletin. Thank you so much for being with us. A special thanks to our L24 News technical team. Bye for now. See you.